Okay, we're going to finish up this week looking at Part B on the video as we look at Chapter 9 on enforceability. Remember, we have a duty to perform after there is a contract. You have an offer, you have an acceptance. That forms the agreement of the contract. The agreement is not enough by itself. It must be supported by consideration. If there's no consideration, there's no contract. And the contract must have parties that have the capacity and the legality to be able to enter into the contract. You have all those conditions, you have a contract. And once there's a contract, there is a duty by all the parties of the contract to perform that contract. Failure to do that will give rise to damages to one of the parties. Okay, so you have a valid enforceable contract. So you have performance of contract on one side and non-performance. Under the performance of a contract, there are conditions and covenants, and there's a level of performance that can be done. Under non-performance, there's an excuse for the non-performance, and if none of those conditions apply, then you have a breach of contract. So under the conditions, you have conditions precedent, subsequent, concurrent. Performance, you have complete. You can tender performance, substantial, whether the job can be divided into different parts. And then you have the excuse for non-performance. There's impossibility. Commercial impracticability, which is very hard to get. There's waiver and release, where one party just waives and releases the other party. And then there's a breach by the other party, which excuses the first party from doing their performance. There is a breach of contract. Sometimes you don't have to wait till the other party actually breaches. You can have an anticipatory breach. That means that you don't have to sit there and continue paying money to a contractor you know that's not going to be able to finish the job. Once there's a breach of contract, you have damages, and the damages are both monetary and equitable. That is the field of all the things that can happen once a contract has been formed. Okay, we have covenants. Covenants and conditions. A covenant is an unconditional promise to perform. I covenant to do this. A condition sets forth certain conditions that need to be satisfied before a party is obligated to perform his or her side of it. It can be all sorts of different types of conditions. You can say that I will build this building if this certain law is passed, or if I get a loan. That could be a condition. You have an agreement to buy and sell a house, but it's conditioned on a condition precedent. Before I buy it, I have to get a loan for it. You can have conditions subsequent. That's the contract's formed, but it says that unless certain conditions are satisfied, that one party would be relieved of performance. Covenants and conditions are part of the binding enforceable contracts. Okay, conditions of performance. You have conditions precedent, which I said, subsequent. You have conditions concurrent, and they're express and implied. There's an implied condition of good faith and fair dealing. If one party is not acting in good faith, then that would breach the condition of good faith and fair dealing and excuse the other party from their performance. There's levels of performance. Everything's done, completed, contract is finished. You have substantial, small, minor changes that have to be done. Monetary payments can usually satisfy any of the lack of that. You have a material breach. That gives rise to a different level of what happens under a contract. It can actually be terminated if there's a material breach. Then you have divisibility. This would be contract segments, employment. You get paid for certain pay periods. Once that's been done, that's partial completion. Construction contracts generally are not divisible. You buy a house, not a frame to a house. Although some larger contracts could be divisible because they could have multiple buildings. Contract discharge. A party is discharged because they would then be released from an obligation. Obviously, when the contract is completed, both parties are discharged from any further action. Also, a party can tender performance, but it's rejected, and that then releases them from the obligation to actually do the performance. Impossibility would discharge one party. The matter of the contract is destroyed. Remember, we said under an offer, if the subject matter was destroyed, the offer never came into existence, or the contract never came into existence, but you can have the matter of the contracts destroyed after the contract's actually formed as well. Be careful. Mere increased difficulty or increased cost does not constitute impossibility. Look at the case of Parker v. Arthur Murray. I think it's listed under the supplemental areas of the Moodle. And it's a fascinating case because it shows the absolute stupidity of plaintiffs and lawyers. This was a case that was appealed. Read about it, you'll see a single man had signed a contract with Arthur Murray for dancing lessons, subsequently had an illness or an accident, so he couldn't walk, and Arthur Murray sued him wanting the balance of the payment. It was impossible. He couldn't walk, let alone dance. Okay, so contract discharge, commercial impracticability, UCC's Uniform Commercial Code identifies this. For example, if manufacturers are unable to get raw materials, it's not just a cost increase, but they just can't get them. Force majeure, acts of God, strikes, war. Most contracts have an express provision that the party is excused for any force majeure. A waiver or release is where one party releases the other party from any performance. Sometimes it can be upon payment. Sometimes it can be because they just negotiate it and they have want to continue in a good working relationship, and so one party releases the other party. And a contract is discharged with substantial performance. They did almost everything. The other party may get some monetary damages for what they lacked, but they cannot just not perform themselves. And so a breach of contract, look at figure 8.1 on page 238. Party does not perform. There are certain remedies, and one party needs to mitigate damages. The law will come by and say that they have to at least not take advantage of the breaching party. This comes in, for example, rental or employment situations where even though the party breaches, the defendant may not have to pay all of the rent that wasn't paid because the plaintiff should have been trying to release it to another party to mitigate the damages. You can have a negotiated settlement, an arbitration. There's monetary damage awards, a specific performance, which says that the parties cannot just be paid, that one party has to perform. This happens in real estate. You cannot be made whole by just being paid if somebody doesn't fulfill their contract obligation of selling your house, because houses are very unique. So then you go in and ask for the court to say, don't give me damages, tell them to sell me the house. There's rescission and restitution. We talked a little bit about the mitigation of damages, and there's the type of monetary damages. There is compensatory damages. There is a consequential compensation. Compensatory pays for the actual damages, the costs that was lost to see that the contract was performed. Consequential, it's a non-breaching party for the foreseeable special damages, i.e. lost profits. So if somebody breaches a contract, they don't deliver some dresses that are going to be sold at retail, the other party can sue them for the profit that they didn't make because they didn't get it. Liquidated damages. People often confuse liquidated damages with punitive damages, but they are not. It is a reasonable, and it cannot be a penalty, because under contract law there is no punitive damages. So the parties agree that in advance that the damages can't be determined, and therefore they agree on a certain amount that would be used to satisfy it. So there's no punitive damages in contract cases. Next week when we talk about torts, we'll be talking about punitive damages. Look at Venture Media versus Cold Plastics. There's a number of, this is listed, you'll be able to look at it, and it's under the forum, and I've assigned different people different parts.